A beautiful woman is discovered lying in a pool of blood on the kitchen floor of her Cape Cod house. She's identified as fashion writer Christa Worthington.
But the way she was lying on the floor and the blood and, it was obvious that something horrible had happened to her.
It takes the police 4 years to bring her killer to trial.
He seemed like someone who was an easy target. He fit the profile of what people wanted the defendant to be.
But did they get the right man for the murder of Christa Worthington? Christa Worthington has a glamorous career as a fashion writer. She's lived and worked in London, Paris, and New York, but something is missing from her life.
She was a complicated person. It's not easy to describe her quickly. She was very beautiful. She was very smart, very creative.
Christa tires of the high life, and in 1996 decides to return to her roots, Truro, Cape Cod.
Truro has been our home, really kind of the heart of our family. Our grandparents were here for over 80 years. Our great-grandparents were here, and many of us moved back to Truro after being away.
Already well established in her career, Christa is ready to settle down.
She was kind of at a point in her life, she was of that generation of women who had had a career and then found herself, nearing 40 and wanting to have a child, wanting to have a family.
But in Truro, Christa discovers there's just a small pool of eligible men. Eventually, she becomes pregnant by a local married fisherman, Tony Jackett. Ava Worthington is born in the summer of 1999. Christa is 43. Her wish has come true. 3 years later, on Sunday, January the 6th, 2002, the tranquility of Truro, Cape Cod is shattered by the sound of emergency vehicles.
I heard the dispatcher say that there was a call for a unconscious, unresponsive female.
Janet Worthington is not only Christa's cousin, she's also the nearest volunteer emergency worker to the location. It's an address she's familiar with.
My heart stopped, and I just got up and started running for my truck because I knew it was something bad. And because you don't often get calls for young people who are unconscious and unresponsive.
The call is for her 46-year-old cousin, Christa Worthington.
So I just drove very, very quickly with, in really kind of a state of fear. So I went up her driveway very quickly, and when I got to the top of the drive, it was kind of an overcast day and it was getting dark.
When Janet arrives at the house, she finds Christa's front door is damaged.
I ran into the house. I really didn't know what was going on. And she was lying on the floor and she was obviously gone.
Christa is lying on her back, naked from the waist down.
She had not fallen, somebody had hurt her badly. And, I felt immediately, actually, that she had been murdered. I mean, that was the first thing that I thought. And the second thing I thought was, where is this person? What's going on? I got to get the police here.
Blood has oozed from her nose and behind her ear. Her body has stiffened due to rigor mortis. Crime scene investigators examine the body. A long brown hair is discovered on Christa's breast. Samples of skin are scraped from beneath the nails of her right hand. Investigators also discover semen on her body and on a blanket used to cover her. But there is no sign of a murder weapon. Christa's murder comes as a terrible shock to the small, laid-back Cape Cod community. In the weeks that follow, police interview several suspects. Their first is Tony Jackett, the father of Christa's child. She was pressing him for financial support for Ava, but she is dead before the dispute is settled. Jackett passes a polygraph test, and his DNA does not match any at the crime scene, so he's removed from the list of suspects. The police turn their attention to Tim Arnold, Christa's ex-boyfriend. His DNA matches the semen found on the blanket used to cover Christa's body. He admits having consensual sex with her months before, but denies killing her. He too passes a polygraph test, so he's not investigated further. And so the trail goes cold. 2 years after the murder, police still have not found the killer. So in July 2004, they ask anyone who had routine contact with Christa to submit their DNA. Later that year, they also decide to take the drastic step of conducting a DNA sweep of all men in Truro.
This is in order to solve a very heinous, horrible crime that left a little girl without her mother.
Hundreds come forward. Forensic teams begin analyzing the DNA samples that also include the samples volunteered months before. One of these is given by Truro garbage man Christopher McCowen. It matches DNA from semen found in Christa's body.
Last night at approximately 7:15 p.m., detectives from the Massachusetts State Police Detective Unit assigned to my office arrested Christopher A. McCowen, age 33, for the 2002 murder of Christa A. Worthington.
McCowen is interrogated by police for 7 hours. He changes his story several times. Initially, he denies ever meeting Christa. Then he admits to having consensual sex with her. But then he denies it. Finally, he says he went to Christa's house the night she died with a friend, Jeremy Frazier, and it is he who kills her after McCowen has left. Frazier denies it all and passes a polygraph test. McCowen's allegation is discounted. Instead, his constant story changing, his statement to the police, his DNA match, and the discovery that he has 5 restraining orders against him on Cape Cod is enough to convince the district attorney he's the killer.
Did you kill her? Did you kill Christa?
In February 2006, McCowen is indicted for the first-degree murder, aggravated rape, and armed assault of Christa Worthington. The prosecution's assumption is that the last person who had sex with Christa also killed her. And the evidence of McCowen's semen seems damning. But right from the word go, McCowen's defense team have doubts about the case.
I just knew in looking at the case initially that the arrest had seemed much too easy and much too pat for me to be comfortable with.
Black men from the Deep South are a rarity on Cape Cod. McCowen arrived on the Cape 10 years earlier, having been released from a Florida prison for grand theft auto. He has a low IQ and a low-paid job. His favorite pastimes are smoking marijuana and making love. All of this, George believes, plays to local prejudices. He's convinced McCowen is arrested simply because he's a convenient choice. His trial begins on October the 18th, 2006, here at the Barnstable Superior Court of Massachusetts. The prosecution is led by local Cape Cod Assistant District Attorney Robert Welsh III. McCowen's defense attorney, Robert George, is based in Boston. For him, this is a contest that will be fought out in unfamiliar territory.
I can tell you that it's a challenge to try cases on Cape Cod because, like in any place that you go to that you're not used to being at, you come from the outside and you've got to learn to do things their way.
Opening statements by the defense are optional, but in this case, George believes he's no choice but to give one.
I've always believed that you have to give an opening statement, especially in a case like this, where all of the gruesome evidence is going to be laid out by the prosecutor in his opening. You know, a prosecutor's best friend is a bloody crime, a horrendous crime, an outrageous crime, because it shocks people, into voting guilty.
George tells the jury to concentrate only on the evidence and reminds them of one matter he believes to be critical.
I pounded home the different issues that I wanted the jury to pay attention to, and I let them know, very early on. I held a mirror up to them very early about the issue of race. I wanted them to know that they, in this particular case, it was an issue.
George aims to follow a dual strategy. First, he wants to get McCowen's statement to the police ruled inadmissible. He argues that he changed his story so many times, it simply cannot be relied upon, though he does not deny that his client had sex with Christa. As a second line of defense, he'll try to show that while Christa and McCowen had sex, this doesn't make him either a rapist or a killer. George begins with McCowen's statement. It's the backbone of the prosecution's case. He argues that because McCowen is of such low intelligence, safeguards should have been in place to ensure the accuracy of his statement. When given the option of having his statement recorded, he declined. But George argues the police should have recorded it in any case.
The chief investigator in the case didn't write that statement till 6 days later. He wrote it from his own notes. He wrote it from memory. This 27-page report written from memory that purports to be McCowen's statement that was not signed by McCowen, was not read by McCowen, was not tape recorded, was not audio taped, was not videotaped.
But despite George's arguments, the judge allows the statement to be admitted. So George tells the jury that even if they hear the contents of the statement, they should ignore it.
I want you to try to imagine if it was you, or if it was someone you cared about or someone that you loved. Would you want someone in your family to be interviewed for 5.5 to 6 hours without food, without drink, without sleep? Would you want that person interviewed, interrogated? Now, interviewed's different. This isn't like applying for a job, you're being interrogated. There's all kinds of psychological warfare going on.
Having won the argument over the statement, the prosecution call their first witness, Janet Worthington.
I felt that what they wanted me to testify to was what Christa looked like when I found her, and the violent, awful nature of it. She seemed to me to be almost posed by the person that had killed her, and by that I mean her right leg it looked as if her leg had been placed in the bottom bookshelf in the hallway where she was lying. And, so that she was exposed in the most awful way. And it was shocking. And, you just thought whoever did this was making some kind of statement. And I think that's what I testified to, and that's what, the prosecution wanted to have on record.
In cross-examination, Robert George goes on the attack.
I had kind of the false idea that the prosecutors would stop the defense attorney from really going after me. And that really didn't happen. He pretty much went after me personally. I mean, he basically tried to discredit me entirely. And it was awful. It was an awful experience.
George argues that Janet herself changed her story. First, she told the police she went no further than the doorway of Christa's house. But when later interviewed on television, she claims to have checked Christa's pulse. George's aim is simply to sow seeds of doubt about the prosecution's version of events.
Putting her on the witness stand just allowed me to warm up, because she was early on. Warm up, I warmed up on her. You know, much like, Evander Holyfield probably warms up on a heavy punching bag.
The prosecution's next witness is Dr. Henry Nields. He's the assistant to the medical examiner who conducted the autopsy. He tells the jury that Christa was killed by a single knife wound. She was stabbed with such ferocity that the knife passed through her body and nicked the floorboards beneath. But then George sets out to pick holes in the forensic evidence. McCowen has admitted being at Christa's house on Thursday, the 3rd of January, to take away her Christmas tree. It's his normal day for collecting garbage on her block. This is the day the prosecution say he murdered her. But in cross-examination, Dr. Nields says he cannot be certain on which day she died. The defense argues that death could actually have occurred 2 days later. Dr. Nields does not deny that this is indeed a possibility. But if the defense is right about the time of death, then McCowen could not have killed Christa Worthington, as he has an alibi.
How I was able to take the time of death away from when they wanted it to be, all the way back to when McCowen was sleeping on the couch at his girlfriend's house.
George then suggests that while McCowen and Christa certainly had sex when he was collecting her Christmas tree, it had also been entirely consensual. This explains why his semen is found in her body. He asks Dr. Nields to describe the trauma to Christa Worthington's vagina that would be consistent with rape. Nields concedes there was none. George now believes that he struck a killer blow against the prosecution. Their case is that the last person to have seen Christa alive also rapes and murders her. George believes he's shown that not only is there no evidence to prove rape, but that any sex could have taken place 2 days before the murder. The sex and the killing were not necessarily related.
When Dr. Henry Nields testified that there was no vaginal trauma and no evidence of sexual assault, and that he was, I was able to push him back almost 48 hours on time of death. Those were moments where I thought the case was won.
And George goes even further. Intending to prove the crime scene was packed with clues that were ignored or misinterpreted by the police, he calls veteran forensic scientist Dr. Richard Saperstein. Saperstein reveals that a hair not belonging to Christa or McCowen found on her body was not analyzed. Could this have been left by the real killer? The bloodstains in the house were ignored because it was thought it was all Christa's blood smeared around by her daughter. And that blue and white fibers were found on the body but were never examined. Even more curious was the testimony from a DNA expert who said Christa had the DNA of at least 3 unidentified men under the fingernails of her right hand. None of the genetic profiles match McCowen's or any of the original police suspects.
One of the things that happens when you try a case is you're always worried that there's going to be that one bad day. There's going to be that one horrible witness that, like a house of cards, the whole house of cards comes down because one witness is bad. That didn't happen in this case. And in fact, as I was cruising into my defense, when things were certainly going to be better unless someone fell apart on me, I was right where I wanted to be.
So if McCowen didn't kill Christa, who did? George puts forward an alternative suspect, McCowen's friend and alleged drug dealer, Jeremy Frazier. Though he's asked the jury to discount McCowen's statement, the one consistency within it is his accusation that Frazier is the real killer. George argues the police have failed to investigate him properly. Frazier testifies that on the night Christa was killed, he was wearing a blue and white sweater. The defense points out that blue and white fibers are found amongst Christa's pubic hair at the crime scene. For some reason, they are never compared against Frazier's clothing.
When you're able to bring out of a witness, bring out of witnesses, that blue and white fibers are found in the vaginal area of a victim, and Jeremy Frazier's wearing a blue and white sweater the night of the incident. So you just don't think that there's any possible way that a thinking, deliberate, intelligent, fair juror would not have reasonable doubt.
Frazier denies George's accusations. Anyway, he is not on trial, and the fact remains semen found on Christa's body belongs to McCowen. In his closing argument, Robert George sums up why the jury should have reasonable doubt about the guilt of Christopher McCowen. He reiterates his key claims: that Christa was not raped, that the crime scene was mishandled, and that the time of her death may have been miscalculated, giving McCowen an alibi. 3 weeks after the trial opened, the jury retired to deliberate. Robert George is confident he's won.
I thought that I had a really good chance for a not guilty. And I don't think you would have found many people in that courthouse would have thought it was a guilty. And as the jury deliberations dragged on for so many days, and turned out to be one of the longest deliberations in the history of Massachusetts.
On November the 17th, 2006, more than a week after deliberations began, the jury give their verdict. They find McCowen guilty of all charges.
I was shocked and disgusted, although I had a feeling I knew what was coming.
At his sentencing hearing, McCowen addresses the court for the first time.
I feel sorry for the victim's family, her daughter, and her. All I can say is that I'm an innocent man in this case.
Despite his plea, the judge hands down the maximum sentence.
Hereby sentence you to be in prison at the Massachusetts Correctional Institution at Cedar Junction for and during the term of your natural life without the possibility of parole.
For the Worthington family of Cape Cod, no sentence will compensate them for the loss of their loved one.
People say, oh, at least you had some closure. It didn't feel that way to me. It just, in some ways it confirms your worst fears about what happened to your loved one. I think for my family and for me, it was shattering, and it continues. I mean, it shattered our lives, and our lives have not been the same and probably won't ever be the same.
But there are still a few twists in this case. Just over a year after the trial, Robert George is handed evidence from one of the jurors, accusing fellow jurors of being racist. George argues his client did not receive a fair trial, and that perhaps the jury made up their minds long before it even began.
I was disgusted that any juror could just put it all aside and vote guilty because they thought he was guilty. Just remember, thinking someone's guilty is not enough. Thinking they're probably guilty, possibly guilty, most likely guilty, I think he's guilty, that is not enough.
The original trial judge, Gary Nickerson, takes the allegations seriously and recalls the jury to face questioning. But after a lengthy investigation, in April 2008, he rules that the charges of racism are unfounded and that the trial was fair. But 2 years later, based on the racism allegations, Christopher McCowen does win an appeal. The court takes an unusually long time, over 7 months, to reach a decision. In December 2010, his conviction is upheld. Most on Cape Cod have no doubt that the right man is behind bars.
I don't believe that she was having consensual sex with this guy. I just don't think she was involved with him. And I think the fact that DNA was found on her, you know, DNA is DNA. It's pretty conclusive, and that's how I look at it.
Christopher McCowen remains in prison with no prospect of release.
If you went and saw him today, although he's gained some weight, he's his usual self, but he believes he's going to go home. He still believes he's going home.
On a dark autumn night in Charlotte, North Carolina, a young pregnant woman is targeted in a drive-by shooting.
I've been shot. You've been shot? Where are you at, man?
The horrific attack grabs national headlines because the victim's boyfriend is pro football star Rae Carruth. Were Sharica Adams and her unborn son victims of a drug deal gone wrong?
You could tell she was very foggy, trying to figure out exactly what had happened.
Or did her boyfriend plan the hit? Sharica Adams grew up in Charlotte, North Carolina. She was her mother Sandra's only child.
Well, Sharica, even as a child, was very focused, very determined. She knew exactly what she wanted, just vivacious, full of life.
She was like a little light bulb. I mean, she was just a bright spirit, basically. I think a lot of things that your parents try to teach you, that you can do anything or be anything you want to be in life, she believed that about herself.
By the time she turns 21, Sharica's as determined as ever, forging a career in real estate with a busy social life.
She always knew, like, where the latest party was, and she knew some pretty influential people, so it was always pretty much a new experience going with her. I never knew where it was going to take me or who I'd meet.
It's at a party in Charlotte in 1997 that Cherica meets football player Rae Carruth.
She called me on the phone, told me she met this great guy. She couldn't believe he was, so much fun.
Carruth is a talented college football player who has recently been drafted by Charlotte's NFL team, the Carolina Panthers. He has signed a 4-year contract worth close to $4 million. Born in California, Carruth had always dreamed of playing pro ball. Now at 23, he's hit the big time. The young athlete and Cherica become an item almost immediately.
Just knowing his personality and her personality, I think they had a lot of fun together. We probably laughed a lot because Rae was a very upbeat, funny person.
Then, on Mother's Day 1999, Cherica tells her mother she's expecting a baby. And the father is Rae Carruth.
That was like one of the best Mother's Day presents that I could get, knowing that I would have a grandchild. She was so excited about the news. She was just glowing, very excited.
Still, Cherica knows she's not the only girl in Carruth's life. and she's not happy about it.
He was involved with other women, and Cherica was such an outspoken person, and she wasn't trying to be number one. She was wanting to be the only one.
But Carruth had left a string of ex-girlfriends behind, and he'd already fathered a son in California. He shows no sign of changing his ways.
She decided for herself she was just going to end the relationship, and they would be co-parents, is what she called it, and just both have a part in their child's life, but it might be better if they didn't date.
For Carruth, the news of Cherica's pregnancy comes at a bad time. Though his first season with the Panthers had been spectacular, he'd been plagued with injuries ever since. Rumors start circulating that he's becoming a burden to the team, and Carruth is worried. Already paying child support for his son in California, it seems the last thing he wants is another child.
His first reaction was he wanted her to have an abortion, and she was very adamant that she was not going to have an abortion.
I think that he was used to being in charge of the decisions that were being made. And with Cherica, he didn't have control over what was going to happen.
But when he realizes Cherica is determined to keep the baby, Carruth gradually appears to accept the idea.
As time went on, he seemed to get more excited about it. He was going to doctor's appointments. He even had gone to Lamaze class with her.
In November 1999, Carruth invites Cherica out on a date.
She wrote in her journal was their first official date as a couple again. That they had decided that they were going to work things out, and so she was excited.
Cherica meets Carruth at his home, and the two of them go to the movies. Afterwards, they head for Cherica's house, driving in separate cars. Cherica follows Carruth. They've reached an isolated stretch of Rea Road, just minutes from the movie theater. Woodland flanks both sides of the street.
Baker, you need police, fire, or medic? Police, I've been shot. You've been shot? Where are you at, man? 5 times. Come on. Listen to me. You're on a wireless phone. I don't know where you are, so tell me where you are, man. Where are you at? At Calvary Church. I know. Calvary Church? No. 11 Cape Street. You're where? Ma'am, Rea Road. You're on Rea Road.
Cherica has been shot 4 times in the back and neck. She manages to keep the car moving, drives it onto the lawn of a nearby house, and there, struggling in pain, she calls for help.
Okay, where are you shot at, ma'am? I don't know. I was driving. You were driving and someone shot you? Yes. Did you see the person that shot you? I'm 8 months pregnant.
You think about what must have been going through her mind at the time.
I'm going to connect you to medic. Continue to talk to them because, ma'am, we have to help you. We have to find out where you are. Stay with me on the line. Ma'am, stay with me. Stay with me. Keep talking to me, ma'am.
You would hate for anybody to experience that. And especially with her carrying a child.
When police arrive at the scene, they find Cherica alone in her car, badly wounded. She is rushed to the Carolina Medical Center and goes straight into surgery so doctors can try to save her and her unborn baby. In the early hours of November the 16th, 1999, Chancellor Rea Adams is born by emergency C-section. He's 10 weeks premature. And the little boy has not escaped unharmed.
They really gave me a very grim prognosis because he lost so much oxygen and so much blood. Every part of his brain had been affected. And the neurologists were telling me that, you know, basically he might just be existing, that he wouldn't be able to walk or talk or learn.
Sandra's first reaction after arriving at the hospital is to call Rae. She knew Cherica had been on a date with him that night.
I repeatedly just called him on his cell phone. I was trying to contact him, and I never heard anything from him, and it took hours before he actually came to the hospital.
Homicide detective Darryl Price is also sent to the hospital.
When she became conscious again after surgery, she had been intubated, so she couldn't speak, but she was alert. One of the nurses had actually given her a piece of paper and something to write on, and you know, was asking a lot of questions.
Cherica is barely clinging to life, but finds the strength to write notes based on her memory of the shooting. She writes that Carruth was there when the shooting happened, and then had driven off.
She was asked, did he do this to you? And she didn't indicate that he did, but she didn't indicate that he didn't. It was more of a big question. You could tell she was very foggy, trying to figure out exactly what had happened. And, you know, so she made several notes of some things that had taken place to give us a starting point.
Shortly after talking to detectives, Cherica falls into a coma. Police ask Rae Carruth where he went after going to the movies with Cherica. He claims he went straight to a friend's house, which the friend corroborates. But Detective Price isn't convinced. He decides to go back and try to pinpoint the time of the shooting.
When she called 911, our computers document the exact time she's calling. And we knew that the shooting probably took place then or a minute or two prior, but not a whole lot of time. So we knew pretty much the exact time.
Next, Price needed to locate Carruth at the time of the shooting. It turns out he was also talking on his cell phone when Cherica was calling 911.
Through cell phone triangulation, we were able to tell that he was within a short distance of the actual location that the shooting occurred. So we knew based on that the story that he was telling us was not true.
9 days after the shooting, the police believe they have enough evidence to arrest Carruth for conspiracy to commit first-degree murder and attempted murder. For many who knew him, it's a shock.
I didn't feel like that was something that he would do because that wasn't his personality.
Police examine Carruth's phone records and arrest 2 other suspects who he had spoken to on the night of the shooting and in the days beforehand. They are habitual criminal Van Brett Watkins and drug dealer Michael Kennedy. Carruth is released after posting $3 million bail and agrees that if Sharica Adams or the baby dies, he will turn himself back in. All 3 suspects claim they're innocent and say nothing to implicate the others. That is, until Rae Carruth gives a television interview that enrages Van Brett Watkins.
Carruth came on television and they were asking the question, what do you think about this person that the police department's brought in? And, you know, that's what set Watkins off. When he saw Carruth saying that, you know, I hope that this is the guy.
Carruth's comment is enough to make Watkins break his silence with police. Incredibly, he admits that he was the trigger man in the shooting of Cherica Adams and that Michael Kennedy was the driver of their car. He also says that Rae Carruth planned and paid for the hit.
Watkins' story fit all of the evidence that we had compiled. It fit. He told us where he threw the gun. The gun was actually located where he said he threw it. You know, he told us exactly where it took place, which he wouldn't have known that. He told us, you know, where Rae's car was, where their car was, who was driving his car. And he had no reason to tell those lies because he admitted the culpability of being the shooter.
So far, Rae Carruth is still only charged with conspiracy to murder and attempted murder. But then, on December the 14th, 2000, Cherica Adams takes a turn for the worse.
When her vital organs were shutting down and they knew that she wouldn't have a good quality of life, you know, I made the decision to have them take her off life support because I knew how vivacious she was. And because of our faith, I believe that she's in heaven. So it made it easy to make that choice.
When Carruth hears Cherica has died, he doesn't keep to the agreement to turn himself back in. He runs. Carruth is now a fugitive, wanted for first-degree murder. Police and the FBI launch a search. After just one day, and acting on a tip, they find him, hiding in the trunk of a friend's car in Wildersville, Tennessee.
At 5:45 p.m. Central Time, Rae Carruth was arrested by FBI agents at this Best Western motel.
The tip that led to Carruth's capture came from an astonishing source, his own mother. Apparently fearing he might be shot by police if they cornered him, she had turned him in. On November the 20th, 2000, at Mecklenburg County Superior Court, Rae Carruth goes on trial for his life. If he's found guilty, he will face the death sentence. Prosecutor Gentry Cordill lays out the state's case. He says the most compelling witness will be the victim herself.
And I ask you to listen to one tough little lady putting up a heck of a fight for life. Hers and the baby's.
The courtroom listens in silence as Cherica Adams' 911 call is played.
Okay, can you tell what part of your body you're shot on? My back, my neck. Okay, how'd this happen? I was following my baby's daddy, Rae Carruth, somewhere. So you think he did it? He slowed down, and the car pulled up beside me. And then shot at you? Yes.
The atmosphere in court was very hushed when they played the call, and even people on the defense side were just holding their breath.
And then where'd he go? He just left. Okay. All right, what's his name? Rae Carruth. Okay, what's his name? Rae Carruth.
It really was a very proud moment for me to sit there and listen. It just demonstrated my daughter's determination. She was just being such a wonderful mom. She was taking care of her child.
Football hero Rae Carruth drove away and left Sharica Adams and his own son for dead.
To have her own words, that was very powerful. I think I've ever had that kind of evidence in a case before.
Next, Cordill outlines the trail of evidence to the hospital, where after surgery, Cherica wrote notes implicating Carruth.
He was driving in front of me and stopped in the road. And a car pulled up beside me and he blocked the front. I think Rae had something to do with it. Before we left his house, he called someone and said we were leaving now.
At the time, Cherica had no idea who Carruth was talking to. But from phone records, police identified the man as Michael Kennedy, the getaway driver. Now, incredibly, partway through the trial, Kennedy, who had previously denied involvement in the shooting, decides to become a witness for the prosecution. He points the finger firmly at Carruth.
Rae giving me the money to get the gun, and that he wanted me to drive his friend to follow him after he left the movies, and that he was going to, I guess, attack Sharica or make her lose the baby.
He then talks the court through exactly what he says happened that night.
Rae went over a hill and then down in a dip. Then he stopped his car. She stopped behind his. Then Watkins told me to pull up beside her car, and he started shooting at her car.
To Detective Price, Carruth's motive for the shooting is obvious.
He was a young, aspiring athlete in his mind, and he had gotten a woman pregnant that he wasn't in love with, and didn't want to consider the fact of being tied down through a child, through child support or alimony or whatever else may have come out of that. And he felt that the easiest thing to do would be to have her killed.
With the dying words of Sharica Adams, her notes, and Michael Kennedy's testimony, the prosecution is feeling confident. Now, it's the defense's turn to present their case.
His intention on November the 15th, members of the jury, was to be the best father he could be.
Carruth's defense attorney, David Rudolph, looks to undermine the prosecution's witnesses. He begins with Sharica Adams herself, claiming her dying testimony is not reliable because she was too concerned about her unborn child's safety. Next, Rudolph turns his attention to Michael Kennedy and Van Brett Watkins, the confessed triggerman who'd cut a deal with prosecutors in return for a lesser charge and a lighter sentence. Rudolph accuses the two men of making up the story implicating Carruth to deflect blame from themselves. He says they had gone to confront Carruth that night over a botched drug deal. The defense calls a county sheriff's deputy who says Watkins confessed to her while in jail.
And he said, Sergeant Riddle, I just lost it. I lost control. He said, I just started shooting. And then he said, Sergeant Riddle, it was Ray's fault. If he had just given us the money, none of this would have happened.
When he takes the stand, Van Brett Watkins again admits to shooting Sharica.
I fired one shot and 4 more shots. Bam, 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 bam. She was screaming.
But he sticks to his story that Carruth paid him to do it. And turning to address the jury, he denies making any jailhouse confession. Still, the defense hopes they can provoke Watkins' quick temper in court, making the jury question his reliability as a witness. And Watkins doesn't disappoint.
I'm 286 pounds. Okay, I would rip you like a rag doll.
Yeah, I don't know how to describe him. He was full of surprises anyway.
After a trial lasting 8 weeks, the defense rests. Rae Carruth never testified. His fate is now in the hands of the jury, who must decide if Sharica's murder was the result of a drug deal gone wrong, or Rae Carruth's plan to eliminate his unborn child. For Carruth, it's a matter of life and death.
I'd ask you to hold him responsible for what he did. Hold him responsible for what Cherica saw him do.
The jury deliberates for 16 hours before returning their verdict.
We, the jury, return the unanimous verdict as follows: that the defendant, Rae Lamar Carruth, is guilty of conspiracy to commit murder of Cherica Adams, but not guilty of the first-degree murder of Cherica Adams.
Despite believing Rae Carruth did conspire to kill Cherica, the jury controversially refuses to convict him of first-degree murder. They don't believe he should get the death penalty when the actual shooter, Van Brett Watkins, got a 40-year sentence.
I felt a little bit disappointed because I knew he should have been charged with murdering my daughter. but I felt relieved that he would be going to jail. He would not just be walking out of that courtroom, going back to his all-star life as a professional football player.
Sharica's mother, Sandra, makes a heartfelt plea to the judge to give Carruth the maximum possible sentence.
I just knew that I wanted that judge to understand that my daughter's life stood for something, that she had a meaningful life. Let him take a punishment, not of a little boy, but of a man for one time. Let him be held responsible for the acts that he's done. Being able to make that impact statement was my one and only chance, I thought, at getting across how important that it was for justice to prevail. And I wanted to convey that with all the intensity, with all the emotion, with everything that I had in me.
On January the 22nd, 2001, Rae Carruth is sentenced to 18 to 24 years in a North Carolina state prison.
Because he was a star player, he felt he was above the law. It doesn't matter about how much money you have, how much status you have responsibility, and you have to be accountable for your actions.
To think that someone that has that place in society could commit this heinous of a crime, I think it bothers people to the point they don't want to believe it. Had she died at that spot, I'm not sure this case would have ever been solved.
Yeah, you ready to get on Lexi? You ready to get on Lexi? Yeah.
Ever since her daughter's death, Sandra has cared for Sharica and Carruth's son, Chancellor Lee.
Oh, Chancellor is definitely our miracle boy. He's doing so well. Everything that the neurologist told us, the grim prognosis, you know, I never believed it, I never accepted it.
You ready, Lee?
Whoa, oh,
Good job. Oh, walk on, that's right. I believe that Sharica's in a much better place. We'll see her again. Chancellor knows Mommy as his mommy angel. I miss her tremendously, but I have her in my heart, and I have her in Chancellor. He helps to make my life complete. A lot of people think I'm there for him. I think he's there for me.